There's a myth about Texas. It's a myth we Texans are damn proud of, and one the rest of the country has bought into hook, line, and sinker for the better part of 2 decades. It's the myth of the Texas miracle. The idea that this state is a perpetual motion machine of growth, a land of limitless opportunity, low taxes, and ever-rising fortunes, where the only direction is up. For years, the fuel for that myth, its most visible and potent symbol, was our real estate market. People flocked here from California, from New York, from all over the world, chasing the dream of an affordable, spacious home in a place where the economy was always booming. And for a while, the myth was real. But I'm here to tell you that the miracle is over. My name is Carter, and I'm a third-generation Texan. My grandfather drilled for oil in the Permian Basin. My father was a rancher, and I've spent the last 20 years as a commercial real estate analyst, charting the explosive growth of our cities. I love this state. It's in my blood and in my bones. And that's why I have to tell you the hard truth. The Texas boom, the one that seemed like it would last forever, has finally hit a wall. And in many places, it's not just hitting a wall, it's going into a sharp, painful, and deeply unforgiving reverse. This is not a story you'll hear from the politicians in Austin or the developers in Dallas. They're still selling the myth. But if you drive the back roads, if you look past the gleaming new corporate campuses, you'll see the signs. You'll see the half-finished subdivisions baking in the sun, the skeletons of abandoned construction projects. You'll see the for sale signs multiplying like weeds. You'll feel the anxiety in the small towns and the sprawling suburbs, the quiet fear of people who bet their life savings on the Texas miracle, only to find themselves trapped in the hangover. So, over the next 3 parts, I'm going to give you a guided tour of that hangover. This is my list of the top 12 Texas cities where home prices are decreasing the fastest, and where the risk for the future is the highest. My criteria isn't just about a dip in the Zillow estimate. I'm looking at a deeper metric, what I call a city's brittle economy score. It's a combination of 3 things. First, its dependence on a single volatile industry. Second, the gap between its explosive growth and its investment in critical infrastructure like water and power. And third, the severity of its affordability whiplash, the speed at which it went from being a bargain to being a burden. These are the places where the foundations of the Texas miracle were built on sand, and the tide is now going out. Let's start the tour at number 12, in a place that was the absolute poster child of the pandemic-era boom. We're going to the Austin suburb of Leander. The fantasy of Leander was potent. Just a few years ago, it was the answer to the Austin dream. As the city of Austin itself became catastrophically expensive, Leander was pitched as the family-friendly, affordable alternative. You could get a brand new 3,000 square foot house for a fraction of the price of a tiny bungalow in Austin proper. It had good schools, a safe suburban feel, and it was attracting a flood of high-earning tech workers who were fleeing the West Coast. The growth was explosive. Bidding wars were the norm. Prices doubled and then tripled in what felt like an overnight frenzy. The reality of 2026 is that Leander is now a commuter's nightmare, a classic example of what happens when a community's growth completely outruns its infrastructure. The affordability is gone. The median home price in Leander, while now falling, is still completely disconnected from what a normal non-tech worker family can afford. But the real problem is the whiplash from the tech boom itself. The wave of layoffs that has swept through the Austin tech scene has hit these suburbs the hardest. And the widespread corporate push for a return to the office has been a death blow. The dream of working remotely from your beautiful suburban home has been replaced by the brutal reality of the commute. The main artery into Austin, Highway 183, has become one of the most congested corridors in the state, a soul-crushing 3-hour round-trip traffic jam on a good day. People who moved here for a better quality of life have found themselves trapped in their cars. The result is a market that is drowning in inventory. The laid-off tech workers who can no longer afford their massive mortgages are trying to sell. The remote workers who have been called back to their offices in California are trying to sell. And they are all competing with the dozens of new construction subdivisions that are still being completed, projects that were greenlit at the peak of the boom. It is a perfect storm of oversupply and collapsing demand. The dream of an affordable Austin suburb has died in a traffic jam, and the property values are now paying the price. From the rolling hills of central Texas, let's head 300 miles west into the flat, sun-baked plains of the Permian Basin. Coming in at number 11 is the capital of the oil patch, Midland, Texas. The fantasy of Midland is the fantasy of Texas itself, distilled to its purest and most potent form. It's the dream of oil, of wildcatters and roughnecks, a city of rugged individualism where a person can make a fortune through hard work and a little bit of luck. The fortunes of Midland have always risen and fallen with the price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate. It is a city of booms and busts, and the real estate market has always been a roller coaster. The reality this time is different. This is not just another bust. What we are witnessing is the beginning of a structural, long-term decline. As an analyst who has charted the energy markets for 20 years, I can tell you that the fundamentals have changed. The global energy transition is no longer a political talking point. It is a multi-trillion-dollar economic reality. The massive institutional investments are no longer flowing into fossil fuels. They're flowing into renewables, into battery technology, into the green energy infrastructure of the future. The easy-to-get shale oil, the stuff that powered the last great Permian boom, is largely gone. The cost of extraction is rising, while a long-term global demand for oil is projected to stagnate and then decline. What does this mean for Midland? It means the city's entire economic model, its complete and total dependence on one single commodity, is a fatal flaw. The high-paying jobs in the oil patch are not coming back in the same numbers. The frantic waves of investment that once fueled the housing frenzies are not returning. The city is facing a slow, steady bleed. The real estate market is reflecting this new, terrifying reality. The subdivisions that were thrown up in a hurry during the last boom are now sitting half empty. The rental market has collapsed as the transient workforce has moved on. And for the first time in its history, the homeowners of Midland are facing the prospect that their property is not just in a temporary downturn, but that it may never recover its peak value. The city is a perfect example of a brittle, monoculture economy, and its housing market is the first and most visible casualty of a changing world. Let's head back east to the northern edge of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. At number 10, we find the city of Denton. The fantasy of Denton was that it was the cool, quirky, and authentic alternative to the endless beige sprawl of the DFW suburbs. It was a college town, home to 2 major universities, with a thriving music scene and an independent artistic spirit. It was the place you moved to when you wanted the economic opportunities of the Metroplex, but you didn't want to live in a master-planned community where every house looked the same. It was, however, much better placed for the pandemic-era migration to suburbs. The reality is that Denton has become a victim of its own success. The very sprawl it was trying to differentiate itself from has now completely and totally consumed it. What was once a distinct town with its own unique identity is now just another traffic-choked node in the great undifferentiated suburban sea of North Texas. The primary problem here is a massive infrastructure deficit. The city's population exploded as people were priced out of the closer-in suburbs, but the investment in roads, in water, and in public services never kept pace. The local streets are in a permanent state of gridlock. The city is facing a looming water crisis, with demand projected to outstrip its supply within the next decade. The very authenticity that made it attractive, the funky downtown square and the historic neighborhoods, has been hollowed out, replaced by a ring of generic big-box stores and fast food chains to service the sprawling new subdivisions. And now, as the broader market cools, Denton is left in the worst of both worlds. It has all the problems of a massive, congested suburb, the traffic, the strained services, the rising property taxes to pay for new infrastructure, but it has lost the unique cultural identity that once made it a desirable destination. It's a city that has had its soul paved over by its own growth, and the property values, once propped up by its cool kid reputation, are now falling back to a reality that is far less appealing. For our final stop in this part, we're heading back out to the Permian Basin. At number 9 is the sister city to Midland, Odessa, Texas. If Midland was the white-collar capital of the oil patch, the fantasy of Odessa was that it was its blue-collar, working-class heart. It was a grittier, tougher, and...
The Texas miracle is facing a reckoning, and we're just getting started. We've toured the fringes, the overhyped suburbs, and the one-trick pony oil towns where the hangover from the last boom is the most acute. But now, we move into the heart of the beast. We're going to the big cities, the anchors of the Texas Triangle, the places that were supposed to be the safe bets, the blue-chip stocks of the real estate world. These are the cities that fueled the myth, that drew in hundreds of thousands of people with the promise of high-paying jobs and a high quality of life. But the foundations of these cities are cracking under the immense, unsustainable weight of their own growth. The rot here is deeper, more systemic, and in many ways more dangerous than in the outlying towns we've discussed. Our countdown continues at number 8 with the city that, for years, was seen as the smart, savvy alternative to its glitzy neighbor. We're going to Fort Worth. The fantasy of Fort Worth was built on its identity. It wasn't Dallas. It was Cowtown, a place with a real, tangible connection to its Western heritage. It was more laid back, more authentic, and most importantly, more affordable. It was the place you moved to get the economic benefits of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex without sacrificing your soul to the endless, characterless sprawl. It was a bet on culture, on a real sense of place. The reality of 2026 is that Fort Worth has become a victim of a crisis of identity. In its desperate race to compete with Dallas, it has sacrificed the very authenticity that made it so attractive. The city's leadership bet everything on massive, sprawling growth, particularly in the vast industrial and residential developments to the north, in the Alliance area. And while this created an explosion of jobs in logistics and manufacturing, it has come at a terrible cost to the city's infrastructure and its quality of life. Fort Worth is now choking on a level of traffic congestion that rivals that of much larger cities. The commute from the northern suburbs to the downtown core is a brutal, soul-crushing grind. The city's infrastructure, particularly its water and sewer systems, is straining to keep up with the explosive, low-density growth, and property taxes are being jacked up year after year to pay for the new roads and pipes required to service the endless sprawl. The city has, in effect, traded its unique, walkable, historic character for a generic, car-dependent suburban model. And it is losing the battle on both fronts. It is now just as congested and sprawling as the suburbs of Dallas, but without the same depth of high-paying, white-collar jobs. The housing market is now reflecting this new, less appealing reality. The affordability advantage has been eroded by the boom, but the quality of life that was supposed to come with the higher prices has been destroyed by traffic and overcrowding. The market is now correcting sharply as people realize that the authentic Fort Worth they thought they were buying into has been replaced by just another anonymous piece of the great North Texas Metroplex. It's a city that has lost its way, and the decreasing home values are a direct reflection of a community that no longer knows what it wants to be. From the plains of North Texas, let's head south to the Gulf Coast. Coming in at number 7 is the biggest city in our state, a place of immense energy and ambition, but one that is built on a foundation of profound and largely ignored environmental risk. We are going to Houston. Now, if you listen to my colleagues who cover the growth markets, they'll tell you Houston is a boomerang city, a place reinventing itself with a diversified economy in medicine and aerospace. And they're not wrong. The job creation, particularly in the medical center, is a real and powerful engine. But that is only half of the story. The other half of the story is water. The fantasy of Houston is that it is a city that has tamed its environment, a city of relentless can-do optimism that can engineer its way out of any problem. The reality is that Houston is arguably the most flood-prone major city in the entire United States. And the problem is getting worse with every new subdivision that gets built. The city is a monument to the Texas model of near-zero regulation and unchecked development. For decades, developers have been allowed to pave over hundreds of thousands of acres of the coastal prairies that once acted as a natural sponge for the region's biblical rainfalls. This has turned the entire metro area into a vast, slightly tilted concrete slab, with nowhere for the water to go. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 should have been the final wake-up call. It was a clear, terrifying demonstration of the city's profound vulnerability. But the boom of the last few years created a dangerous amnesia. The lessons were not learned. The development continued, pushing further and further into the floodplains. Now in 2026, the market is being forced to remember. The insurance crisis that has crippled Florida is now arriving in Texas. Homeowners' insurance premiums in the Houston area, particularly for flood coverage, have tripled in the last 3 years. The National Flood Insurance Program is in debt, and private flood carriers are fleeing the market. This is causing a catastrophic decline in home values in the most vulnerable areas. I'm talking about entire communities on the west side of Houston, near the Addicks and Barker reservoirs, places that experienced devastating flooding during Harvey. I'm talking about the low-lying communities along the bayous that now experience street flooding during a common thunderstorm. These are no longer seen as desirable family neighborhoods. They are seen as uninsurable liabilities. The falling property values are a direct repricing of a known and escalating existential risk. And to make matters worse, the Texas power grid, as we have all learned, is notoriously fragile. The combination of more frequent and extreme heat waves in the summer and the risk of Arctic freezes in the winter has made the simple act of keeping your lights on and your air conditioner running an expensive and uncertain proposition. Buying a home in Houston is no longer just a bet on the job market. It is a direct, high-stakes gamble against Mother Nature in a city that has spent 50 years stacking the deck in her favor. Let's head back up I-45 to the other great hub of the Metroplex. At number 6 on our list, we find the city that is the corporate and financial capital of the state. We're going to Dallas. The fantasy of Dallas is the dream of the modern global Texas. It is a city of gleaming skyscrapers, of Fortune 500 headquarters, of high finance and big deals. It is the sophisticated white-collar heart of the Texas miracle, a magnet for corporate relocations and the ambitious professionals who come with them. The reality is that Dallas has become a hollow core. It is a city that has become incredibly successful at attracting corporations, but has failed spectacularly at building a sustainable and equitable community for the people who actually live there. The city is a case study of extreme and growing inequality, and the housing market is beginning to crack under the strain of this social imbalance. The problem in Dallas is not a lack of jobs, but a massive and growing mismatch between the jobs being created and the cost of housing. The city has attracted thousands of high-paying corporate jobs, but it has also become a playground for institutional investors. In the years during and after the pandemic, massive private equity firms bought up entire neighborhoods of single-family homes, particularly in the more affordable working-class areas of the city. They turned these homes into rental properties, systematically choking off the supply of starter homes for local families and driving prices to levels that are completely disconnected from the local wage base. Now we are seeing the consequences. The working class that the city depends on, the teachers, the nurses, the service workers, can no longer afford to live in the city. This is creating a massive labor crisis and hollowing out the very soul of the city's neighborhoods. The housing market is now bifurcated into two failing markets: In the affluent northern suburbs, the market is correcting for the reasons we've already discussed: the end of the remote work boom and the sheer unsustainability of the peak prices. But in the traditionally more affordable neighborhoods in South Dallas and the inner ring suburbs, a different and more tragic decline is underway. These are the areas that have been systematically neglected, starved of investment in favor of the glittering new developments to the north. The schools are underfunded, the infrastructure is crumbling, and the institutional landlords who own a huge portion of the housing stock have little incentive to invest in the community. The property values are falling here not because of a market correction, but because of a managed, long-term decay. Dallas has become a city that works very well for a corporation's balance sheet, but it is failing as a place for ordinary people to build a life. And that brings us to number 5. This is the big one, the Golden Child, the city that was for a decade the fastest growing and most mythologized city in the entire country, the city that was supposed to be the future. We are, of course, going to Austin. The fantasy of Austin was the ultimate dream of the 21st century. It was the place where the creative slacker culture of the 90s met the tech tsunami of the 2010s. It was the home of South by Southwest, of live music, of weirdness and innovation. It was the promised land for a generation of young, educated professionals, the place that offered the career opportunities of Silicon Valley with the quality of life of a laid-back, creative town. The reality of 2026 is that Austin has become a parody of its own success. It has become the very thing that the people who moved there were trying to escape. It is a city that has been suffocated by its own hype. The primary problem is what I called affordability whiplash.
The Texas miracle reached its most perfect, glittering form in Austin, and it is in Austin where its failure is now the most spectacular. The city stands as a monument to a particular kind of Texan hubris, the belief that you can have infinite explosive growth without any consequences, that you can invite the entire world to your party and not eventually run out of room. The hangover from that party is now a brutal, citywide migrant of falling property values, crushing taxes, and a vanished sense of place. And as we now enter the final 4 of our countdown, we will see how the different poisons that have sickened our major cities are now metastasizing, creating new and even more toxic combinations in places that once seemed like they were on the cusp of their own Austin-style miracle. Coming in at number 4 is a city that sits directly in the crossfire of the Austin-San Antonio boom, a place that for a few frantic years seemed like it was the smartest bet in the state. We are going to San Marcos. The fantasy of San Marcos was its location. Situated right on the I-35 corridor, almost exactly halfway between the 2 fastest-growing metro areas in the country, it was supposed to be the perfect release valve. It was a beautiful college town with a crystal-clear river running through its heart, and it was attracting a flood of commuters, students, and businesses who wanted access to both Austin and San Antonio without the big city price tag. The growth was off the charts. The reality is that San Marcos has become the canary in the coal mine for the single greatest existential threat facing the future of Texas, a threat that makes oil busts and tech corrections look like minor inconveniences. I'm talking about water. The entire I-35 corridor, this booming mega region of millions of people, gets its water from one primary source, the Edwards Aquifer. It is a vast, underground labyrinth of porous limestone that has, for a century, been treated as an infinite resource. It is not. The relentless, unchecked development from San Antonio to Austin, the paving over of the delicate recharge zones, and the sheer number of new wells being drilled have pushed the aquifer to a state of crisis. And San Marcos, sitting directly on top of it, is at the epicenter of the coming water wars. In the summer of 2025, for the first time in its history, the iconic San Marcos Springs, the headwaters of the river, stopped flowing for 3 weeks. It was an ecological and psychological shock that sent tremors through the entire region. The city is now facing the prospect of severe, long-term water restrictions, a moratorium on new construction, and a future where the beautiful, life-giving river that is the city's entire identity could could become a seasonal muddy ditch. The housing market is the first casualty of this new terrifying reality. The developers who are planning massive new subdivisions are having their permits denied, and home buyers are for the first time looking at a property in San Marcos and asking a question that was once unthinkable. If I buy here, will I be able to turn on my faucet in 10 years? The falling home prices are not just a market correction, they are the beginning of a massive, long overdue repricing of a resource that everyone took for granted. San Marcos is the first Texas city where the value of a home is being determined not by the job market, but by the water level in the aquifer beneath it. And it will not be the last. From the dry hills of central Texas, let's head to the coast, to a city that bet its entire future on a single global gamble. At number 3 on our list is Corpus Christi. The fantasy of Corpus Christi was that it was about to become the energy capital of the 21st century. As the shale oil and gas boom in the Eagle Ford Shale took off, the City Council and Port Authority went all in on a vision of becoming the world's premier hub for the export of liquefied natural gas, or LNG. They approved plans for a half-dozen multi-billion-dollar LNG export terminals, projects that promised to bring thousands of high-paying permanent jobs and trigger a massive economic and real estate boom. The speculative frenzy was intense. Investors, both large and small, began buying up land and residential properties, betting on a future of explosive growth. The reality is that the future never arrived. The global energy market is a fickle and brutal beast. A combination of a global economic slowdown, a supply glut from other producing nations, and a dramatic acceleration in the green energy transition in Europe and Asia meant that the demand for American LNG did not materialize at the scale that was projected. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, the multinational energy giants began to quietly, one by one, cancel or indefinitely postpone their massive terminal projects. The promised boom became a catastrophic bust before a single shovel was even in the ground. The city of Corpus Christi is now a graveyard of broken promises. It is left with a landscape scarred by the preliminary work for these failed projects and a housing market that is in a state of absolute collapse. The speculative bubble, which had been inflated by pure, unadulterated hype, has burst with breathtaking speed. Homes that were purchased by investors a few years ago for $400,000 are now being dumped onto the market for $250,000 and are still finding no buyers. The local economy, which was already struggling, has been completely demoralized. The city sold its soul for a single, high-stakes bet on a volatile global commodity, and it lost. The falling home values are the testament to the profound danger of a civic leadership that trades a sustainable, diverse future for the intoxicating and ultimately false promise of a single, spectacular jackpot. Now for our runner-up. At number 2, we're going to a place that is in many ways the ultimate expression of the Texan spirit of defiance against nature, a place that has been living on borrowed time for over 100 years. We are going to Galveston. The fantasy of Galveston was the dream of the historic, accessible island getaway. Unlike the sterile modern beach towns, Galveston has a soul. It has its beautiful Victorian architecture, its rich and storied history, and a gritty, authentic character. It is a real city on a barrier island, a place that has always stared into the teeth of the Gulf of Mexico and refused to blink. The symbol of this defiance is the seawall, the massive concrete barrier built after the Great Storm of 1900, a storm that remains the deadliest natural disaster in American history. The reality is that the seawall is a monument to a past that no longer exists. It was built to protect the city from a 1900-level hurricane, but the hurricanes of the 21st century, supercharged by a warming Gulf, are a different and more powerful species of monster. The science is undeniable. The combination of rising sea levels and the increasing frequency of major hurricanes has made the entire island of Galveston one of the most vulnerable pieces of populated land on the entire planet. The question is no longer if, but when another catastrophic storm will hit. And just as in Houston, but on a more existentially terrifying scale, the insurance market has finally woken up to this reality. Galveston has become functionally uninsurable for the average homeowner. The private carriers have fled, and the only options left are the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association and the National Flood Insurance Program, both of which are financially broken and are now charging premiums that are completely unsustainable for a middle-class family. It is now common for the annual insurance premium on a modest, historic home in Galveston to be higher than the annual mortgage payment. The market is collapsing under this weight. The only people buying are cash investors who are converting the historic homes into short-term vacation rentals, playing a grim game of musical chairs with the next hurricane. The city's infrastructure is crumbling, constantly battered by salt water and storms, and the tax base is eroding as property values plummet, creating a municipal doom loop. To buy a home in Galveston in 2026 is to consciously buy a ticket on the Titanic after it has already hit the iceberg. It is an act of defiance against a force that cannot be beaten, an investment in a future that is almost certain to be washed away. And that brings us to the end, the number one city on my list, the most dangerous, the most overvalued, and the most symbolically significant collapsing real estate market in the entire state of Texas. You might be expecting a struggling border town or another oil patch casualty, but the truth is far more shocking. The number one city is a place that for decades has been held up as the absolute pinnacle of the Texan dream, a community that was supposed to be perfect. We are going north of Houston to the Woodlands. The fantasy of the Woodlands was the fantasy of the master-planned utopia. It was one of the first and most successful master-planned communities in the entire country. A forest of pine trees meticulously preserved, with beautiful homes, pristine parks, world-class schools, and major corporate campuses, all connected by a network of winding, tree-laned parkways. It was a bubble of affluent, orderly, and safe suburban perfection. It was consistently ranked as one of the best places to live in America. It was, in short, a bet that you could engineer the perfect community, a place insulated from the chaos of the outside world. The reality is that the Woodlands represents the catastrophic failure of that very dream. Its perfection was an illusion, one that was entirely predicated on the fortunes of one single industry, oil and gas. The Woodlands was, for years, the white-collar headquarters of the Houston Energy Corridor. Its massive corporate campuses were filled with tens of thousands of highly paid oil and gas executives, engineers, and geologists. These were the people who could afford the multi-million-dollar homes, who supported